Well, let's go ahead and jump in. And like I said, feel free, especially with a smaller group, to ask questions as we go along. I'm going to go through the plant section first, and then we'll do the fish section second. And yeah, we've got till 9:30 or even, like 9:35 if we need to. So let me grab that screen. Hopefully screen sharing will work okay this morning. And we can talk about plants a little bit. A lot of people come into and they ask, do I really need plants, or, are they hard to take care of or whatever? And, trying to do the natural ecosystem, they're a huge part of it. We always talk about, there's 5 portions of the ecosystem, which is, the filtration, the circulation system, the filtration, or I said filtration already, the rocks and gravel on the bottom, and the fish and plants are also part of that ecosystem. So the biggest thing the plants do is take up nutrients, and any plants need the nutrients to grow. So if we have excess nutrients, or even just the right amount of nutrients in our pond, the plants are going to pull those up. So they will normally help to limit the amount of algae. They're not going to eliminate it, but they will help to limit it a bit, because they're taking those excess nutrients, pulling them into plants, a more complex plant. I mean, algae is a plant too. It needs nutrients to grow. But the more complex plants, like your marginals and your lilies and those kind of things, are going to pull it up and help keep the algae load down. The other thing, some plants too, whether it's some of the floating ones or like a lily, will actually help with some shading, give your fish a place to hide, and also kind of cool the temperatures a bit in your pond. So big pluses for adding plants. And the other thing too, of course, is just the beauty of it. A lot of people love to be outside and gardening and stuff. And the nice thing about these plants is you don't have to water them. They're already in there. You really don't have to feed them much, because they're pulling nutrients out of the pond. So it's more just trimming and upkeep is really all it takes to keep them going. So next point, planting tips. There's a lot of plants out there that are in pots, but just like normally your plants in your backyard that you're planting in your garden or whatever, you're not keeping them in the pot. You're planting them directly down in. And so that's what we like to see. So we've got lilies are down in the rocks and gravel in the bottom of the pond. And then all the marginals are along the shelves along the outside. Planted, again, right down into the rocks and gravel. I mean, we do sell aquatic soil for those people that are putting them in pots and things, but honestly, if they're down in rocks and gravel, they're going to spread out through that gravel, pull their nutrients from the pond. They really don't need soil, because soil is to provide, the nutrients for them to grow. And in a pond situation, they really don't have to have that. So, again, marginals along the edges, lilies down in the deeper part. One of the biggest things, as far as questions and stuff that we get is, what can I plant in the deep part? 2 feet deep, what can go there? And honestly, it's really lilies is the one thing that can go down to that depth. Everything else of the marginals and stuff likes to be more on that first shelf, maybe 8 inches deep, and around those edges. And if you look at any natural pond too, that's really what you're going to see. The plant growth is all, along those edges and the perimeter of the pond. So some of the different types, again, marginals, when we say marginal, we're talking about stuff on the margins of the pond. So they're kind of, wetland, bog kind of plants, but there's a wide variety. I mean, some of the stuff you see in other places in your yard, whether it's iris or creeping jenny, works great in a pond. Other things, there's lots of grasses that work well. Cattails are okay. We carry normally like a micro or a mini cattail. Never would recommend putting the big old cattails in your pond, because getting them back out, they will take over your pond, and they are almost impossible to remove. Just cutting them out is very difficult. Sometimes we see it in very large ponds, a quarter acre or something like that, where the cattails will take over. But the small cattails are fine, but keep away from those larger ones. And as far as, just like anything, you want different heights, different colors, things that bloom different times of the year. Like we've got our marsh marigold just started blooming in our pond. That's always number one to start things off. And then the iris are normally next, so that's a good one to have. Plus iris give a good backdrop and good height. and then from there the other plants kind of get going and kind of catch up. So again, we kind of have some of those taller ones like the more reeds and grasses and things like that, and then there's another kind of a lot of creepy stuff too, whether it's creeping jenny, water forget-me-not, or stuff that's more kind of a ground cover to soften those edges and really those where that rock edge is, we're filling in between the rocks. We've got those plants spreading out, and at the end we almost there's a blend from the landscape into the pond to soften all those edges, that it just doesn't look like rock all over the place. So, and that's why a newly done pond, as soon as it's completed, it looks nice, but it's a little stark. Once we get that green in and that spreads out and that pond matures over time, it's just so much more beautiful. So another type of plants is floating plants. Really the two that we carry here are water hyacinth and water lettuce. There's a few others out there, watercress and a few others like that. The one thing about them is they are actually tropical. They are great filtration plants. The roots hang down into the pond, so they're pulling up nutrients out of the pond. They're helping to shade it. They grow quite prolifically. Most people end up tossing some out during the season because they're going crazy. But they're a great filtration plant. But they are a tropical plant. They're not going to winter over here in Colorado. Some people will try and bring them inside, which you can try, but they are relatively cheap. So a lot of people just throw them in the compost bin and start over the next season. So those floating plants, again, water hyacinth and water lettuce do very well to help with our pond. They give it a nice look too. Submerged plants, we don't actually carry any of the submerged plants. Our supplier just isn't that big on those, but there are some that actually will be down along the bottom of the pond and actually give off oxygen too to help with the pond. Again, it's not something that we carry here just because our supplier doesn't have those. Water lilies are kind of the jewel of the pond. Most people love to have their lilies, and that's kind of the focus. The marginals do great and they're pretty too, but the lilies are the neatest part. Like you go to botanic gardens and they're focusing a lot of their large ponds, or the lilies are the centerpiece. So there's tropical and hardy lilies both. Here in Colorado, we don't carry the tropical lilies, partly just the expense, and you can't plant them until probably June, so the growing season is so short. We don't actually carry them here, I think. So get them or whatever, but we just carry the hardy lilies, so they're going to come back every year, and the hardies do great. The advantage of tropicals is you can get some other colors you can't get in hardies, like purples and stuff like that. But still, the hardies are very very beautiful. The main colors are, I'm going to forget something, but white, pink, red, yellow, peach. Those are probably kind of the main ones. But lilies are great. Again, they not only can be in that deepest part of the pond, but they also help with some shading to cool the pond a bit, give the place to hide under those leaves, and just the beauty of them. The flowers themselves is just, I don't know, it's a great focus of the pond. Another one too is Lotus. Lotus, we have one in our pond. Some years it blooms and some years it doesn't. So there is definitely a hardy variety of lotus. Lotus is the one plant that we do recommend you actually keep in a pot because it can get going and take over. And we've been told too by people that that know more about plants than me that a lotus, you almost have to fertilize it every week. It takes up so much to push up the leaves and push up the flowers. But a lily flower is this big, and a lotus flower is this big, and it's the same kind of flower. So I mean, they're absolutely gorgeous. If you like those, they do take a little more work, like you said, with the fertilizing things, but they can be really pretty too. Again, I mentioned a little bit of perennials and tropicals. Tropicals is mostly on the lily side, and you do kind of want to be careful on the zones of the water plants you get. We carry stuff here to most everything we carry is hardy, so it's going to come back year after year. But we do have a few things, the hyacinth, the lettuce, and a few other like taro, those kind of things that do. Some people will take them in and treat them like a house plant and then put them back outside again the following season. As far as pruning goes, like I said, that's the biggest maintenance with plants is just keeping them going. Your marginals on the edges, you're gonna there's a little bit of pruning during the season, especially if you had flowers and things. But most of the pruning happens in the fall. You want to cut everything back before winter. That goes into the winterizing part too. But you cut them marginals, you cut back above water level so they can still get oxygen to the roots. The one exception to that would be the grasses. Like most grasses in your yard, you want to wait till springtime to cut those back. The lilies is probably the one thing that takes a little more pruning. So ideally, those lily pads, as they push up, only have a certain amount of time that they last, and they just keep pushing up new ones. So when you start seeing those get brown around the edges and stuff, you want to clip those off so the new growth comes up. And then the same thing with the flowers. The flowers will last 3 or 4 days, and then that flower won't open anymore. It'll get kind of waterlogged and fall down below the water surface, and then you want to that off too, so that we're pushing up new growth rather than trying to feed that old one that's died off. So just that cycle of pruning off the dead pads, the dead flowers, you're going to get your plants or your lilies are going to do a lot better. Fertilizing, same thing. Really, the one plant that we recommend fertilizing besides the lotus is the lilies. Most of your plants are taking all their nutrients out. Lilies would do just fine without fertilization, but I tried it in my pond one year. I fertilized them religiously about every 3 or 4 weeks, and I got many more pads and I got many more flowers. So even though it takes a little time, once it gets warmer, it's not too big a deal. You take that filter tablet, you kind of screw down in with your finger, just make a little hole, push that tablet in, 2 per lily, and you're fertilized and done. The biggest thing about it is getting in the pond to do it. But definitely worth fertilizing your lilies. You're going to get more pads, you're going to get more flowers. And like I said, with winterizing, I mean, really the primary thing is just cutting everything back. The lilies your lily pads are going to die off. So you're just going to, you're not going to even be able to tell the lily's there because all the growth is gone from it. And if you would have any tropical plants, you would bring those in for winterizing. So those are kind of the main, the main things as far as winterizing. Not a ton to do with your plants. So maybe any specific questions on plant stuff that I missed or went over too quick?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. You said lilies are as far deep as 2 feet. That's about it.
No, and if I said that, yeah, that's not quite what I meant. They're the one thing that can go in the bottom of the pond. They can go as much as like 4 feet deep. They do a little better when they're a little shallower because that's a lot of effort to push up to that height. But they can go deeper than 2 feet. You don't want them much deeper or much shallower than maybe 1.5 feet. Just concerned about the roots wintering over and freezing, getting too cold. So yeah.
Got it. And then on the floating plants with the water lettuce and stuff, I have obviously circulation pushing towards the skimmer. Is there a need to anchor those? Because I've
yeah, otherwise they will all end up in your skimmer. So a couple of things we do sometimes, if you have a biofalls at the top, we'll just throw them in the biofalls because that will help to contain them. The other thing is if you want to put them in, usually the best thing is just fishing line. Try and figure out a way, a corner or whatever, run some fishing line across, and then that way those can be in that area and not end up in your skimmer all the time. We've had people also make a plant ring. Sometimes we'll do it as a feeding ring for fish too. But if you get like some 1/2-inch pipe and just make a little hula hoop, that'll just float in there. You attach that with fishing line so it doesn't float, and then you can throw your hyacinth in there or lettuce, either one. So that's another
great ideas. I love that for the biofalls, dude. Thank you. That's perfect.
And you do have to watch out if you do put them in the biofalls because eventually they can get to the point that they're actually raising the water level and blocking it. So you just have to thin them back periodically to make sure you get plenty of water coming out.
Got it. Thank you.
So just real quickly, my water hyacinths always start to brown out on the leaves. Have you've seen that before? Is it,
I have, and I wish I had a better answer for you. I should probably ask our plant people about that, because some people are like, so hyacinth are banned in selling of hyacinth is banned in like Florida and places like that because they grow so prolifically, they choke the waterways.
Right.
So and we always hear the opposite of, oh my gosh, I'm throwing them out, by the bag full because I have so many. But we do have a few people, and I wish I had a better answer for you, Richard, of why that is. I don't know if it's a lack. Do you have like full sun, partial sun?
the ones that go brown the fastest are actually in full sun?
That it's almost too much for them. And
might be.
Yeah, I don't know if it's something about our Colorado. I mean, they always say the sun's more intense here than other places with less humidity and less atmosphere. People come from out of town and get sunburn all the time.
I'm getting a complex because
what's
people
that?
call me. I'm sorry.
And so yeah, I don't know if that's part of it or if it's just because sometimes it's almost a well-balanced pond. Overall, does your pond do pretty well?
Yes.
And so it's almost like they're starving a little bit, lack of nutrients. Everything else is doing so well. I wish I had a better answer than you, and I'll try and find that out too and let you know, because we do have people once in a while. It's like, I just can't get them to grow the whole season, and like you said, at a certain point they start looking kind of not so good, not so lush like they should.
Yeah. So if you can answer, I don't know if this, but I've not done water lettuce. Is water lettuce more difficult to kill? Would it be better be a better choice than the hyacinths, or is it this? Have you heard that from any people?
No, not really. It's kind of the same thing with both, because water lettuce will get a little crispy sometimes too over time. So yeah, it's kind of the same thing. And I mean, everybody has their preference. I like the hyacinth a little better. I think they're just a little more green and lush. But sometimes a mix of both,
I do
too. Well too.
Yeah, I have a question. So what about timing for planting? Can we plant now? Should we wait a couple weeks?
We just got our plants in this week. We try and kind of stick to that, close to that Mother's Day thing, just like you do with your regular plants. I think we're at the point now you can certainly plant, because water level, even though we may have some near freezing nights, but your water temperature isn't as extreme as your temperature of the air. So it's gonna kind of even out a little bit more. So putting plants in now would be fine, as long as you stick with the more hardy varieties. Like, we didn't even get floating plants in yet because we could have some of those cold nights that are gonna damage them. But the more hardy varieties we have gotten in, and you can start planting now.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. If it's okay, because don't want to get too rushed here. Let's try and jump into the fish, unless there's any other plant questions. Anybody else have something? All right, let's jump into fish a little bit too. So our pond fish, the two main types for a pond are koi and goldfish. People ask all the time, trout, and we say, you need to do different things if you're going to try and put trout in your pond. They don't like, warm temperatures. It starts getting to be 60 degrees in a pond, and they are not too happy. So you got to go much deeper and do different things if you have trout. Other game fish like bass or whatever, we've had people put them in. Honestly, they're a little aggressive towards the other fish, and because they're used to being in more a natural surrounding, you don't see them most of the time, and their coloring isn't good. So sticking with koi and goldfish and those decorative fish is really a much better way to go. How many fish can I have? That's one of the big questions we have. A lot of people end up with especially if you have a bunch of goldfish, they end up with an overabundance of fish. But we always say 1 inch per 10 gallons of water. Or you can also say 1 inch per square foot. That's about the same thing. So just say you have a 10 by 10 pond, 100 square feet. That's saying we can have about 100 inches of fish. So assuming that those fish are, when they're mature, are, I mean, they could be 18 inches, but let's just, use something more conservative, 12 to 15 inches. We can probably have 8 fish in there and feel pretty comfortable, in a 10 by 10 pond. So just thinking about that, and that's more koi. If we're going to put goldfish in, I would start with less rather than more, because you're going to end up with more down the road. The biggest thing too is when you mix fish, if you just have koi, you have much better chance of having koi offspring. If you mix koi and goldfish, normally your chances are much less of having koi offspring. For whatever reason, the goldfish go after those koi eggs like crazy, and if you have both, you don't a lot of times have koi offspring, but you do have goldfish offspring. So detoxifiers is a critical part of having fish. The number one fish killer that we have is, I left the hose on. I was filling the pond. I left the hose on all night, and I just dumped a whole bunch of chlorine basically into my pond and killed my fish. So letting the hose run too long without adding the detoxifier, if you're topping off with an inch of water, your pond's down a little bit, you put an inch in and it's a 2-foot deep pond, probably not that critical. But if you're adding 6 inches in a 24-inch pond, yeah, very definitely you need to add that detoxifier. So, and what the detoxifier does, it gets rid of our chlorine, ammonia, heavy metals. So it does more than just dechlorinate. It also gets rid of some of those other nasty things that can harm a fish. So just really important that anytime you're adding a fair amount of water. A lot of people have automatic fill systems, so they don't really know how much water is going in. Not a bad idea to throw a little detoxifier in once a week just to be on the safe side. Another big thing too is feeding. How much, how often. Just make sure you're feeding them a quality food. Some people are still, which is fine, are feeding more of a lighter spring cold water type food right now. But it normally like fish meal or a protein should be the first thing on the ingredients list of the food. And you can feed them up to twice a day. Well, I'll say whatever they can eat in 5 minutes. The biggest reason you don't want to overfeed is if you overfeed, it creates more fish waste. And like a lot of people, if you have a skimmer, the excess food that they don't eat is very high in nutrients, and it can cause an algae bloom. It's going to go into your skimmer. It's going to break down. It's going to end up in the pond, and so we don't want to add a bunch of extra to the pond to tax our filtration system. So again, twice a day, and feed what they'll eat in 5 minutes. We always tell people, kind of same time of day, feed them from the same place. You can get them to that point where they're trained. If you've been to our store, our fish come up to greet you when you go outside. They know, they've been fed enough that they know, and that's a great part of having fish. I don't want to have fish if they're going to hide all the time. I want to be able to see them and have them come up. So that's one of the biggest fun, the biggest enjoyments of having the fish too. So you want to be really careful too where you buy them. I know most people don't have the facilities to be able to quarantine and be able to watch the fish for a couple of weeks. We try and do that here for you. Anytime we get fish in, we watch them for a couple of weeks before we put them on sale to make sure they're all healthy and everything's going okay. And so, yeah, again, you just want to be careful of that. And there's as we talk about fish, I can tell you honestly, from our perspective, the kind of fish we're selling really nice fish, but they're not show quality. There are people that raise koi that do things a little differently than how we do it. They would never introduce a fish into their pond without quarantining it at their home for a couple of weeks because they have thousands of dollars worth of fish in their pond. What we're talking about here is more backyard pond, more a standard grade of fish. They're still, like I said, they're still beautiful, but it's not this show quality. That's not what we're aiming at and what we do. Acclimating new fish. Normally, when you buy fish here, we'll give you a little slip of paper, and what that says is just this is how you need to do it. Basically, you're trying to equalize the temperature is the primary thing. They're going from our tanks here, which are probably 70 degrees, to your pond, which right now is probably 50 degrees. So you've got to acclimate that temperature. You've got to get that temperature to be within a couple degrees, so you don't shock those fish and kill them. So you get them. We'll put oxygen in the bag. You take that bag home. You float it in the pond. This time of year, as much as probably half an hour. You can even add a little water from the pond into the bag to help to equalize that temperature. And then at that point, we recommend actually, putting your hand in the bag, wet your hand, and then place the fish in the pond rather than dumping that whole bag of water that came out of our tank. Just don't introduce that into your pond. Just introduce the fish themselves when you get them home. So just taking a little time to equalize that temperature. Symptoms and treatments is a little bit, it can be very difficult. We had 3 people in yesterday who, this is the most stressful time for fish coming out of winter into the warmer temperatures. 3 people yesterday that had kind of like fungal stuff. They had white gunk growing on the fish. So try and give them the treatments. We can do your best. You can try and take a fish out that's sick and try and treat it, or you can try and treat the whole pond. It can take some work, because a lot of times it means water changes and multiple applications and things, but there are definitely some things you can do to take care of them. So I'm gonna skip past that. Winter, we always say number one question we get about ponds is, what do you do with the fish in the winter? Well, the fish go, like a 2-foot deep pond, the fish go down to the bottom and hibernate and do just great down there in the wintertime. Just a couple of websites I wanted to make you aware of. If you are having fish problems, koivet.com is a great one. Doc Johnson has done some seminars for us and with Aquascape, has some good troubleshooting and ways to look at it in there. Another site too is we carry fish up through 6 to 8 inch. But if you're looking for some bigger fish or some real specific fish, nextdaykoi.com is a great resource. They will actually ship fish directly to your house. If you want to, you can order a bag of a certain size, or like you see here, you can actually order specific fish. So pretty cool stuff. All right, let's, sorry, no, I got to the wrong screen. Any specific, I went through that a little bit quick, but got about 5 minutes here. So any specific fish questions that you guys have?
So again, as far as timing, should we wait a couple more weeks to put them in, especially if we're in a higher elevation like evergreen, or can we do it now?
Great question. We are actually, our fish go on sale this coming Wednesday. And again, we were kind of waiting till it got a little bit warmer. Being up in evergreen, I think I would still give it a couple more weeks. I just said, because I'm guessing your temperature is probably even in the low 40s for your pond. So I would give it a little bit longer. Again, just because of that, going from 70 degrees to 40 degrees is really stressful on the fish. So waiting a couple more weeks would probably be a good idea. I mean, we had a lady up past Conifer yesterday who said she still has ice on her pond. So yeah, so I would wait still a little bit. I don't have ice,
but it's probably in the 40s, better temperature.
Yeah, I would wait till you at least get
and then more. How about?
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and once we, let's say wait a couple more weeks towards the middle to end of May, can we start feeding right away? Are your fish being fed now, or should we wait a little longer?
Great question. Yeah, I probably went through that a little too quick. That 50-degree mark is kind of our key. Really, when we hit 50 and water temperature stays consistently, again, water temperature, not air temperature, water temperature stays consistently over 50, we can start feeding them at that point. So you're probably a little ways away from that. I would think people down here in Denver, after a few warm days, might be at that point now. So yeah, you can certainly start feeding them now. And a lot of times too, people worry about, oh gosh, are they gonna? They're not going to starve. It's better to wait a little longer and err on the side of caution, because what happens is if you feed them too early, we get a 2 or 3 day cold spell. Basically, that water temperature, they slow down. You know how they just go down to the bottom and hang out. Their digestive system also slows down and stops at that point, so that basically that food that sits in their stomach and isn't digested can kill them too. So that's why we wait, to make sure that it's warm enough that their whole processes are working okay. We get a warm day and they come up and they're swimming. It's like, just wait till we're consistently above 50. So
great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So is there any trick to breeding koi? So I used to have goldfish, and I took them out of the pond. I had millions of them, and
Yeah.
and people told me they stunted the growth of the koi as well. So anyway, I got rid of all the goldfish, but I think the goldfish came in on plants.
Yeah, and that is very possible that the eggs were already fertilized. I mean, you can look online. There's certain things that you can do, like give them a place during the spawning time to lay the eggs, and then if you really want to be serious about it, you actually take the eggs out of the pond and putting them in somewhere else, so that the fish, because the fish are going to eat some of the eggs. I mean, it happens. It happens in our river systems. I'm a fly fisherman. It happens in the rivers. It happens, in your pond too. But some of them, normally will survive. Usually, it takes a cold snap after some warm temperature, and if you've ever seen your females getting chased around your pond, that's the spawning time. The males, it's part of nature. The males chase them around. That helps to expel the eggs. And one thing too, depending on how many fish you have, you never quite know. You can't tell male and female. You never quite know if you have both. I mean, you would hope if you have enough fish, you do. There's always the chance that you only have females or only have males.
But the things like you're putting in the water, like algicide or whatever, probably don't help, right?
That really doesn't affect it. It's such a minute amount of that you're adding. I've never heard that algicide would harm the eggs or anything during that time.
Wow. So do they? I won't keep you here. I know you're.
No, it's okay.
Do the eggs wind up on plants like the marginals?
They do. Yeah.
Oh.
Normally that's where they'll end up. And I mean, I can tell you in our pond here at work, which I pretty much see every day. I've really never seen the eggs. I know they're in there. We've had fish offspring here, but I've been to some other ponds where, again, if you look up, I can't remember the name. It's almost like a rope, like a egg rope or something like that. That they will lay their eggs on that, and they will really adhere to that and stuff, and then you, again, the idea is you take that out and wait for the fry to hatch, and then you're going to get more of them. And the whole process of the way our fish come from Blue Ridge in North Carolina, and the whole process of how they grade them and cull them and all of that is pretty amazing how that's all done. And, they all live in big mud bottom ponds out in North Carolina and do great there. Sometimes we worry about our fish being happy. If your water's a little green, the fish could care less. It's more you that cares about that. All right. Well, we'll wrap up here. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning on this beautiful Colorado day. If you have more questions, you can always come into the store. Again, our plants are on sale now. We've got a few, not a ton. Fish go on sale next week. We're always here to answer questions by our email link is on our website, or give us a call and we'll help you out wherever we can.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. See ya.